of structure. Another thing you could do, pretty good vocabulary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some of it might even escape you, some of the terms. So it's very native-like or higher than average native-like native vocab. But the collocations are really nice. You embrace difference, absolutely perfect. There are lots of them through. An interesting exercise would be for you, possibly tonight, we could do it with a paragraph later, maybe just to get you started. Underline all the collocations, and just by doing that you kind of absorb them a bit more rapidly yourself. But it's very strong in that respect. Yeah. Ahmed, try the next clip.
Did you read?
Oh, sorry, James. Yeah.
To be honest, it is difficult to say that Clendon or
Clendon has the stress. Clendon.
Say that Clendon is a heavy-duty expert about Aboriginal issues, but her own special angle of viewing Aboriginal issues reflects her idea about the relationship between history and democracy. In other words, it implies her opinion about what kind of history is needed in a democratic nation. Another issue regarding teaching history in schools further demonstrates her idea.
Good, thank you. Now, just a couple of his mistake here. In another words. In other words. Yeah. He's kind of got two things mixed up there, hasn't he? You can't say in another word. It's always in the plural, that expression. In other words. Yeah. So a little error there.
In other words, is the
Collocation. Yeah, that's right.
And also, to be honest, is the collocation.
It is, yes. Yep. In other words, is what we call a restating phrase, isn't it? When you want to restate something, to make it clearer, sort of useful phrase in writing. Now, just next line, just pronunciation, opinion. You just have front stress on that, James. Just pin has the stress. Schwa, not o. Opinion. Opinion, yeah. All right, let's go over. Ahmed, now it's your turn to be famous.
In 2006, Parliament John Howard gave a speech on a train day and emphasized the failure to teach Australian history as an objective record of achievement. Howard proposed that Indigenous studies should be integrated into all stages of the Australian history program. Inga Clendinen then published her essay, The History Question, Who Owns the Past? In it, she raised an important question.
Raises, because it's third person singular.
Raises
Yep.
an important question about teaching Australian history in schools.
Good, thank you. Cindy, do you want to have a read of that and the quote, please?
As far as she is concerned, in human affairs there is never a single narrative, and all history is complex, multi-threaded. She states that a so-called narrative, objective record of achievement, is as below. History in the grand narrative sense will always belong to the victors, whether the war is between peoples, or classes, or genders, or generations. They will create and control the official record, and their point of view will inform the stories which present themselves as no more than innocent, objective descriptions of what happened.
Good, yeah. Are we clear on that word in the first line of the quote, the victors? If you think of the word victory, I'm sure you know that. Triumph, winning. Victors, the people who win. So here she's saying, you know, history belongs to the winners. They're the ones who usually write it. At least the dominant history of a society. Yeah, that's the main point here. Now, usually we stop we do this in bits and go about halfway to stop and analyse. For the purpose, I think it's better with this particular essay for reasons which will probably come up in the discussion and analysis. I think if we read the whole thing, we'll get a clearer picture, and then I'll hand it to you to discuss the whole thing. I mean, it's a fairly complex, high level of thinking, isn't it? It's not totally straightforward. You've got to kind of think about philosophy of history and so on and so forth. So I think one of the reasons is that, the difficulty of it. You get a better understanding of the whole piece if we read the whole thing and then analyse it. Rather than analyse half at a time, we'll keep going. So with that in mind, Mohammed, try the next paragraph, please. It is argued.
It is argued that in essence Howard intended to advocate patriotism through the narrative of history taught in schools. Glendinning stresses that the aim of teaching history in school is to train students to have the ability to evaluate historical sources, distinguish different voices, and form arguments, bring students to critical, conscious scrutiny of their own responses and thinking.
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah, thank you. Now, scrutiny, looking very, very carefully at something. If you scrutinise a document, you look at every single word, say before you sign the contract. And be very careful kind of investigation into something. Yeah. Just first line there, Mohammed. Howard intended to advocate patriotism. First syllable stress. Patriotism.
Patriotism.
Patria means Latin for country. There are lots of words we get.
So we don't have to say, oh,
no, patriot. It's a schwa. Yeah, not patriot. Patriot. Patriotism. So a patriot, somebody who loves their country, like nationalist. Yeah. You get, if someone is repatriated, they're sent back to sent back to their country. Expatriate, somebody who lives outside, like yourselves, expatriate, right? So the word patria
comes from the country.
well, it means country, but ultimately it means father, patra. All right, change the p to a f. Koreans will know; they often get confused. So father, patra, is related because many cultures say the fatherland or the motherland, different metaphors, but these two things are related, the father and patra, the country. Yeah. Okay, Sadia, roll on please.
Her opposition to the political manipulation of history arises from her cherishing the past and the fact that she does feel a connection to the country and to what has happened here. Due to the important role of historians in the reconstruction of the past, Glendinning worries that professional historians will be involved in the fabrication of history. Thus, she stresses that historians should be responsible for good history and keep a zero-tolerance approach to any fabricated history.
Good, thank you. Nicely read, all good. Nimika, go on.
In 2005, Kate Greenwich published her book, The Secret River, and claimed it as a serious work of history. Glendinning criticizes the fact that the book is not a history, but a work of fiction. She further moves on from the book to the exploration of the relationship between history and fiction, which caused another round of the history wars.
Good. Yeah, try another one.
Glendinning argues that the historian's job is qualitatively different to that of the novelist. She emphasizes the morality of historians. In her essay Fellow Suffers, History and Imagination, Glendinning writes, The largest difference between history and fiction is the moral relationships each establishes between writer and subjects, and writer and reader.
Good, thank you. Nice reading, and even long syllables. You know, my emphasis today is on long syllables and sounding them all out qualitatively. 5 syllables, all beautifully cleared, Ninika. That's really nicely and clearly read. Thank you. Just one point, the secret river. Remember yesterday? You know, we were looking at the top 100 Australian novels, and listed there was the secret river, about the settling of the Hawkesbury River outside Sydney. So here's the reference. Yeah. I think what we'll find, a little bit like with your presentations on the social issues, by the time everybody presents, even about halfway through, by the time people present on their intellectuals, because all these intellectuals are kind of interrelated, not always, but somebody's criticised somebody else or somebody agrees with somebody, you start to see references a little bit like that. Oh, Clendenin, oh, here's a reference to the Secret River, which I now know about. You might not have read it, but at least you know. So the lines on the map will start to get drawn, and even cross connections between some of the dots. And that's the whole point of, well, one of the points of the exercise, is so that you end up with at least a bit of a basic roadmap that you can then travel around on, and you'll know the key kind of reference points in the future. You know, when you're reading the paper or watching the ABC and they mention somebody and there's some reference to some of these people, it's just you've got your foundations in place. It's obviously up to you how much time and effort and energy you want to put into populating that with lots more detail. Different people have different levels of interest in that, but I would argue the more you do that, the more culturally you're going to adapt, the faster you're going to adapt. And in fact, as I said the other day, probably you're going to overtake a lot of people in your broader knowledge of Australia and deeper knowledge. So that's sort of one of the aims of the exercise. Yeah, let's move on. Marley, read that and the next one as well, please.
Moreover, Clendenin states that novelists' primary duty is not to instruct or inform, but to delight. Delight varies to historians. Telling the truth is adhering to the iron rule of the discipline. Compared with novelists, she emphasizes that historians must control their personal emotions because too much penetrating sensibility will have a strong influence on the objectivity of the story. In addition, historians have to carefully gather and consider the evidence. She mentions that historians of whatever culture are at once the custodians of memory, the retrievers and preservers of the stories by which people have imagined their personal and civic lives, and the devoted critics of those stories.
Good, thank you. Just your those, make sure you get not those, but those. Yeah. Good. Nicely read, clear pronunciation. Just a couple of points. Consider, not consider, but con. Remember that rule about the syllable before the stressed syllable? The vowel in it will be weak. Consider. And look, just the word custodian, you know, the word custody, like you have custody of a child and you have a responsibility to look after it. Same here, same idea, custodian of memory. I just mentioned that word because it's got all sorts of cultural connotations when used in the Aboriginal area. Aboriginal people are custodians of their country, which means, you know, they're born into that area. Maybe they're, as I said, they're a kangaroo dreaming person. They've got a responsibility to look after that country in a quite special kind of way, which is different from how Europeans would relate to that land.
What does retrieve?
Retrieve, to get back again. So you know, we use it in computing. You save something on the disk and then you retrieve it, you get it back. So here, you've got something put into the memory of a society, and then historians will retrieve it from a written record or a photograph. Yeah, get it back again. I mean, we're doing the model essay. If you got a copy? If you haven't got a copy, okay. We're page 4. Thanks, Lee. Good, Kate. It is.
It is inevitable that this argument causes a fierce debate. Crozier argues that historians and novelists take different methods to interpret history. Alan Atkinson notes that it is impossible that historical scholarship is never an imaginative process, and academic historians are badly out of step with the times. James Bradley seems to express a similar idea to Atkinson.
Good, thank you. Min, do you know where we are? Can you see we're at last paragraph in 4?
Actually?
Yeah, actually, go for it.
Okay. Actually, Clendenin does not object to the historical novelist in essence. She opposes the novelist calls a novel, a serious work of history. The event is just the fuse of a bomb. The comparison of the difference between history and fiction is also not the core issue. The main purpose of the argument is that how historians should serve good history, as evidenced by the notion that nowadays professional historians are increasingly dependent on grant-based research and subjected to the absurd requirement that projects should be predefined in terms of the social utility of their yet-to-be-found findings. The risk is that historians' primary responsibility will be understood to be the present and the future of the nation and not to the past. That the true purpose of Australian history is patriotic and integrative.
Good, thank you. And round we go again, Lita.
As a historian who believes in the power
Believes
in the power of good history by presenting injustice in the past to drive the nation to achieve real justice in the future and to promote the democracy, who always obeys the critical discipline strictly to engage in historical scholarship, who tries her best to define the pure historical territory against political manipulation and any distortion. Inga Clendenin is truly remarkable.
Good, thank you. Now, let's have a look at that last paragraph. Any comments?
The person gave a clear statement about the Inga Clendenin at very end sentence, like a summarize.
Yeah, there's certainly a bit of the writer's opinion in here, isn't there? This is the strongest point where we see the writer's actual evaluation of the person, and that's a typical thing, as we've talked about before. You know, personal opinion is often strongest in the conclusion. Now, because this is an explanation, description essay, really, as I said yesterday, I think you're sort of more distanced from the topic. You're kind of just trying to present it as it is. And here and there, you see little hints of his opinion, like page 2, to be honest, it is difficult to say. That's his voice, and he's marked it, hasn't he? With the to be honest, it is difficult to say. That's his position. So little sprinklings here and there of position, but it should be kind of backgrounded, really. Your primary focus is just clear and relatively objective explanation. I mean, objective, but you know, personally I believe, like a lot of others, involved in social science, there's no such thing as objectivity. Just depends which culture and which politics you come from. Who says what's objective? You know, it's really difficult. But apart from that, as a general principle, be kind of objective, whatever that might be.
What does heavy duty of abortion
That's a bit of slang, really. He has put in heavy duty expert, like an expert. Yeah, bit of slang, probably shouldn't have done it. If we go back to the last paragraph though, my main point here that I was wondering if anybody would pick up, it's a bloody long sentence. And it's dangerous. Be careful. Does it work? Does it work? As a historian who believes in the power of good history by presenting injustices in the past to drive the nation to achieve real justice in the future and to promote, should be again know the democracy, who always obeys the critical discipline strictly to engage in historical scholarship, who tries their best to defend the pure historical territory against political manipulation and any distortion. Inga Clendenin is truly remarkable. Okay, it's long. Now if we break that down, the basic formula is, as a historian who blah blah, who blah blah, and who blah blah, Inga Clendenin is truly remarkable, isn't it? That's the formula. The question is, you've got 3 clauses here that get quite long and complex, and he hasn't handled all of those clauses totally accurately, so it starts to get a bit twisted and become a bit of a mouthful and a bit of a brainful. You know, it's hard for the reader to hold all that in their brain, isn't it? And finally get to the end, you know, and because of that strain, have you actually got the ideas clear? Like I'm even talking about a native to native writer. So there's nothing wrong with long sentences if they're well constructed, but you've got to think long and hard. If you want to build one that's that long, is every clause in it really clear, and are all the clauses connected in correct ways? And you know, where is the main verb in the whole thing? Where's the main verb? Where's the main subject? Etc., etc. As I've said before, it's a bit like, you know, juggling 2 or 3 balls, relatively short sentences, no problem. This is about, you know, 11 balls in the air, isn't it? It's getting hard.
If you were, how you could make
If you think you can do it, do it. But, sorry, your question?
If you were, how you could make it more clear?
Okay. I would have to sit and edit this for a minute because it's... Okay, here I'll edit it. As a historian who believes in the power of good history, I would take out that dash. By presenting injustices in the past so as to drive the nation to achieve real justice in the future and to promote democracy. Then I would put a semicolon. Here is, remember I've mentioned this before, usually you go A, this person has written this, who, A, B, and C, da 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 da. That's the middle of the whole long sentence, isn't it? Inga Clendenin, comma, who does these things. Now, these things here, it's not like apples, pears and bananas, little short words. These are actually, well, it's got to be verbs, doesn't it? Who writes, sings and plays the piano, you know, that's nice and short and clear. So you put commas, normally. 99% of the time you do that. However, she's got quite a complex clause here, isn't it? It's long. So the best thing to do, remember I've mentioned that before? When you have long and complex items that are in a list, semicolons will make it much clearer where the divisions are, and the reader will kind of, in their brain, kind of take a little brain breath, you know, and then go on to the next bit, and they kind of process each bit. So if we do that, that's going to help communication here. Let's have a look if it works. So from the beginning again, to promote democracy, semicolon, who always obeys the critical discipline strictly. Who always obeys, who always strictly obeys her critical discipline. Again, so as to, or in order, I've used that already, so I'm going to have to change it. In order to engage in historical scholarship, semicolon, who tries her best to defend the pure historical, cross out the, defend pure historical territory against political manipulation and any distortion. Right, that's it. Inga Clendenin is truly remarkable. So, okay, a few issues here. So, one is those semicolons help break it up and make it clear, because each one of those is actually a clause, which is complex. It's harder for a reader, instead of apples, pears and bananas, just little things, to hold whole clauses, each of which has a subject and a verb. It's got a process happening, possibly an object. You've got to hold all of that in your brain, don't you, before you get to the end. The semicolon is like a little sentence rest. So it helps the person rest on the journey. Okay, so we've done that. Now, apart from that, there are all those little changes I've made, which are like little bumps in the road. So, you know, if you write a sentence of maybe 10 words and you've got a little bump, the reader will probably deal with that and think, okay, there's an error, but I know what the person means. But you string 3 of those clauses, and each of those clauses has got a little bump, and you still haven't got to the end of the whole thing you want to say, the reader's not only got to hold the complexity of all these in their mind, they've got to process these little errors and try to figure out what the person really exactly means before they get to the end of the sentence, right? That's a lot of processing you're asking your reader to engage in, isn't it? It's heavy work. And the reader is going to get lost in there. So my point is, you know, you can do it if you have got, you know, basically you have to have pretty much perfect grammar, and you've really not got to know what you want to say and be clear and where your main subject and main verb, etc. is. So it's interesting because most of it, he didn't have that many errors, but when he gets to this bit where he's wanting to hold more complex ideas, he's making more errors. And that's a tendency too. You want to start expressing difficult ideas, you'll probably make more errors. So just break it down to, you know, self-estimate your level and your capacity and just express yourself in smaller pieces. The way I would tackle this, you know, because this is trying to juggle 11 balls, let's just split it up. Let's make almost each of these clauses just a sentence. So this is how I would approach it. If you don't feel confident to do that, and that is really hard, then Inga Clendenin is a historian who believes in the power of good history by presenting injustices in the past so as to drive the nation to achieve real justice in the future and to promote democracy. Full stop. She always obeys her critical discipline, strictly obeys her critical discipline to engage in historical scholarship, and tries her best to defend pure historical territory against political manipulation and any distortion. Full stop. Inga Clendenin is thus, I'll put a thus so it connects back, thus truly remarkable. Full stop. That's a much clearer process for everybody, isn't it? It's easier for you to write it. It's easier for me and anybody else to read it. So it doesn't make it like primary school just by breaking things down. If you've got nice connectives like a thus, and you're still building complexity through the connection of ideas.
Or can we bring does at the beginning? Does, Inga Clendenin.
Yeah, you could, that's right. It's a little adverb, and adverbs can move around a bit. Yeah. So that strategy I would apply through your writing generally, you know. So there is a bit of a problem there, and you know, especially in the conclusion where you want to make things very clear to people. If you start doing this, people they end up with a bit of a muddy kind of idea. What did he really mean? You know, which is not what you want to do right at the end. I mean, you don't want to do it anywhere, but especially at the end. End with a bang. As a famous poet said, end with a bang, not a whimper. A whimper's like a little, when you step on a dog's foot, it goes, that's a whimper. A little tiny noise. So any essay you write, any bit of writing, end with a bang, not a whimper. T.S. Eliot, a bang, not a whimper. Whimper. Yeah, always have a bit of